Who Are You My Husband novel. Reading by Zhen. Chapter 1. In a general ward of a city doctor, the nurse walked in and looked at Stephen sitting on the edge of the bed with a trace of contempt in her eyes. Patient family members, you already owe 100,000 medical expenses. If you don't make up for it and pay 200,000 in advance, the hospital will stop the medicine for the patient. Stephen looked away from his daughter's face on the hospital bed, looked up at the nurse, nodded and said, I will pay the money within today. You should beat your wife soon. Call it, the medication will be stopped before 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The nurse sneered. This is a trash man who even looks down on his own wife. She doesn't believe that he has collected hundreds of thousands of medical expenses. The medical expenses for more than half a year are basically shared by his wife. This kind of trash man, who marries him is doomed to a lifetime. This is a typical trash man. Seeing the nurse go out, Stephen's eyes fell on his daughter Moana's face again, and he subconsciously reached out and rubbed his temples. 300,000, where can I borrow it? In the past 6 months or so, my daughter has been hospitalized, and she has already used up all the animals he and Olivia have. And everyone who can borrow money has also borrowed it. He squatted down and touched the pale cheeks of his daughter Moana. Apart from distress, he felt even more uncomfortable. My daughter is only 3 years old. She was originally lively and lovely. She has been devastated by illness for the past 6 months, and she has become extremely thin. If possible, he really hopes that it is him who is sick, not his lovely daughter. Did the hospital come to urge the medical bill? Just then, Stephen's wife Olivia walked in. Olivia is 25 years old, with exquisite features and very beautiful appearance. She is 1.7 meters tall and looks very tall. She looked at Stephen with a little coldness in her eyes. Well, I'll go out to find a friend to borrow something. Stephen nodded, but looked at the man behind Olivia. This man is called David, in his 30s, he is dressed like a successful man. Stephen knows him and is the director of Future Invest Group's sales department. Olivia is the sales supervisor under David, while Stephen is a small security guard of the same company. Seeing Olivia brought David to the hospital, Stephen couldn't help frowning. David knew that Olivia was his wife, and he also had other ideas about Olivia. If David didn't do too much, he would have beaten someone in the company before. 300,000, who are you looking for? Olivia glanced at her sleeping daughter, sat down by the hospital bed, and said mockingly. Before her daughter fell ill, Olivia always believed that the power of love is great. But over the past 6 months, in order to heal her daughter, after both she and Stephen were in debt, her attitude towards Stephen has changed dramatically. Every time she thinks of the huge medical bills, she becomes more upset with Stephen. In the face of reality, no matter how strong love is, it is also vulnerable. Stephen is silent. He doesn't have a few friends in this city, and they are all messed up. It is true that no one else can borrow. Olivia, let me lend you first, £300,000 is a trivial matter for me. David said to Olivia. He looked at Stephen, who also looked at him, and raised his eyebrows, creating a delicate charm. How can this work? Olivia shook her head. Although she was a little moved, she knew that David must have other thoughts. I am also Moana's uncle, and I don't want to see her stop the medication. David smiled slightly. You don't need to worry about my daughter's medical expenses, and you won't have to come to the hospital anymore. Stephen looked at David indifferently, a flash of anger in his eyes. He knew exactly what David had made. Don't bother me to get £300,000. David looked at Stephen playfully. In the face of reality, no matter how strong love is, it is also vulnerable. Stephen is silent. He doesn't have a few friends in this city, and they are all messed up. It is true that no one else can borrow. Olivia, let me lend you first, £300,000 is a trivial matter for me. David said to Olivia. He looked at Stephen, who also looked at him, and raised his eyebrows, creating a delicate charm. How can this work? Olivia shook her head. Although she was a little moved, she knew that David must have other thoughts. I am also Moana's uncle, and I don't want to see her stop the medication. David smiled slightly. You don't need to worry about my daughter's medical expenses, and you won't have to come to the hospital anymore. Stephen looked at David indifferently, a flash of anger in his eyes. He knew exactly what David had made. Don't bother me to get £300,000. David looked at Stephen playfully. In his eyes, Stephen is just a small security guard at the company. What qualifications does he have to snatch women from him? Olivia is one of the most beautiful women in the company. He has already thought about Olivia. Although Olivia and Stephen have a daughter, what does that matter? Just let them divorce. And he is also in a divorced family. He also has a daughter, so he has long wanted to start a new family with Olivia. It's just that Olivia has never caught a cold with him. But now that Olivia has a chance to leave Stephen completely, he certainly will not let it go. That's my business, and you can leave. Stephen clenched his fists, feeling a little aggrieved. Money. He needs a lot of money, not only to cure his daughter's illness, but also to make David shut up and leave. But at this moment, let alone 300,000, he can't get 300,000. A sense of powerlessness came to his mind, and Stephen felt that his life was really sad. David laughed torturously, then turned to look at Olivia. Olivia, it seems that you really don't need my help, so I will leave first. He expected both Stephen and Olivia to be can't take out 300,000, so he is full of confidence and looks like he will eat Stephen. Olivia opened her mouth, quite conflicted in her heart. Don't ask David to borrow money. I don't know where to get the 300,000 medical expenses. Look at David to borrow money, it will definitely hurt Stephen's humble self-esteem. Seeing Lin Yayun biting his lip and not speaking, David narrowed his eyes and made a plan, so he went out. David found the nurse who was in charge of Moana's daily inspection of water delivery, and quietly stuffed her $1,000, and said, Lu, Moana's parents can no longer borrow money, you can urge them to go through the discharge procedures. When the nurse saw that the patient's family members had 1,000 tips, she nodded with a smile, and was going to urge Stephen again. Stephen, you are just a little security guard. How can you possess a woman like Olivia? Looking at the nurse's back, David's eyes showed a sneer. Is your self-esteem more important than Moana's life? Will you die if you don't bow to my parents and Director David? Olivia finally broke out as David left. Up. She cannot borrow money from David, but Stephen can. Although dignity is important, what is dignity compared to her daughter's life? Stephen, I warn you, if Moana has something wrong, I will not let you go. Olivia stared at Stephen angrily, with an indisputable look. At this time, she was extremely disappointed with Stephen. I'm going to borrow money now. Stephen said. Where are you going to borrow money? Now, besides my parents, who can get £300,000 to help us, can't you go and beg them? Olivia said with an aversion to iron. I have my own way of borrowing money. Stephen shook his head. Since he failed to start his own business, Olivia's parents have not seen him as a person, so he will never see them again, let alone go and beg them. You stop for me. Stephen, if you don't ask my parents to pay Moana's medical expenses today, I will divorce you. Olivia saw Stephen leave straight away, a surge in her heart despair. This man, for the sake of his poor self-esteem, even ignored his daughter's life. She really regrets now, regretting her original impulse, and regretting that she finally married him. Walking out of the hospital, Stephen lit a low-quality cigarette and took a deep breath. The anger in his heart could not be calmed for a long time. Money. 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 All this is because of money. Although money is not everything, without money, sometimes it is really hard to move an inch. He took out the phone and turned out a number to note Charlie. He was hesitating whether to dial out. Charlie is one of his few friends, but Charlie's situation is not good, and he has already borrowed £50,000. The most important thing is that Charlie couldn't lend him 300,000. 300,000 is not a small amount. Even if all his friends lent him all their net worth, it is estimated that they would not be enough. Stephen leaned on the railing on the roadside, smoking a cigarette and looking at the sky in the distance. Finally, he sighed, took out the phone and dialed an unfamiliar number. Uncle Thomas, Are you still in St. David City? Stephen asked. Oh, it's the young master. If you don't go back with me, how dare I go back alone? By the way, the young master, have you figured it out clearly? An old man across the room asked a little excitedly. That, Uncle Thomas, can you lend me £300,000 first? I'll use it urgently, Stephen said. 300,000, no problem, but you have to sign the inheritance contract first. After signing, the entire George family's assets are yours. The other side also laughed. We'll talk about the signing later. I really need £300,000 now, or you can transfer it to me first. Stephen said. No, or you can call the master, if the master agrees, let alone 300,000. Even if it is 3 billion, I can transfer it to you. The opposite said firmly. Okay, I promise to sign, where are you? Stephen groaned, with a wry smile on his face, and finally decided to compromise. I'm in the Matrix Heights building, where are you? Or I will send someone to pick you up. The opposite said. No, I'll go to find you right away. Stephen said, hung up the phone, feeling mixed. I thought that because of the death of his mother, he broke with George and left the family resolutely. I didn't intend to forgive him, but the reality is so cruel. Now the daughter has no money to treat the illness, but she is powerless and has to bow to George. This life is so fucking ironic. Well, Olivia, I have been hiding from you for so many years and let you spend a few years with me. Today I am preparing for a showdown. In fact, I am a top rich second generation. From now on, let you live the life of a rich wife. Stephen spit out his cigarette butt on the ground with a bite, and after a flash of firmness in his eyes, he turned around and stopped a taxi to go directly to the Matrix Heights building. When he arrived at the Electron Plaza, Stephen just got off the car when he saw his mother-in-law Demelza coming out of the building. He subconsciously did not want to run into Demelza but found that Demelza had already approached him. You don't take care of Moana in the hospital, what are you doing here? Demelza looked at Stephen with disgust. If her daughter had already had a child, she would have long wanted her to divorce this trash.